Hi, everyone. Welcome. Good morning. My name is Natalie Brown. I'm the Community Engagement Specialist at Eagle. You have joined our Catalyst Communities webinar series, If Not You, Who? If Not Now, When? Changing Our Built Environment Paradigm. A few housekeeping items this morning before we get started. All lines are muted during the presentation. We will have time at the end for question and answer. To ask a question, type your question using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And we are recording this webinar as well. Joining me today, I have Christine Grossman of the Environmental Support Division at Eagle, Ashley Thrush of the Materials Management Division, Jeff Spencer, Manager of the Sustainability section of the Materials Management Division, and Rex LaMore, who will be presenting this morning of the Michigan State University Center for Community and Economic Development. Jeff, feel free to get us started.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Natalie. As Natalie said, my name is Jeff Spencer. I'm currently the manager for the sustainability section within the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy's Materials Management Division. Part of my role at Eagle is managing the Catalyst Communities Initiative. This initiative is a comprehensive program to provide education, training, planning, and technical resources to local government as they work towards their sustainability goals. The state of Michigan has resources for communities in their respective areas, whether it's the Department of Transportation on mobility, Department of Health and Human Services on community health, and Eagle on land, water, and air. But it's not just the state that has these resources. There are also associations, coalitions, universities, nonprofits that offer this wealth of information. Each of these resources contribute to our collective ability to impact our environment and society. The Catalyst Communities Initiative is a hub that connects the dots between all the sustainable actions a local government can take, bringing together all the resources and expertise currently available. Recognizing that each local government faces their own unique challenges with resources, staffing, and areas of oversight, the Catalyst Communities approach identifies areas of need or interest for a local government, gathers the resources, and identifies potential action steps, breaking all of this down into bite-sized pieces that can be easily consumed in a virtual platform and available online for future use. This takes out the constraints of time, travel, and cost to have access to this type of education and training. Next slide, please. The Catalyst Communities Initiative works closely with Michigan Green Communities as well, offering these opportunities for communities to advance towards achieving their sustainability goals. Michigan Green Communities is a statewide network of local government staff and officials that collaborate with one another through peer learning and information sharing to promote innovative sustainability solutions at the local, regional, and state level. The annual Michigan Green Communities Challenge is a key part of this program and allows participants to track and benchmark their sustainability progress. The 2025 challenge just recently closed, but opportunities for involvement in the challenge in coming years is obviously there. But I certainly encourage all local units that aren't familiar with Michigan Green Communities to visit migreencommunities.com, open an account, and start to look at all the available resources and action items within the challenge. So today we have really excited to have Dr. Rex LaMore, Director of the Center of Community and Economic Development at Michigan State University. I was going to talk about how we can all have an impact on changing our built environment, and moving forward from there. So without further ado, Rex, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Let's see here. All right, folks can see the slide, I assume. And thank you for the opportunity to be with you today and share some of the work that we've been doing for several years, examining the current built environment paradigm that we're operating with and the concept of dome ecology, which seeks to articulate a different way of looking at our built environment. And again, I'm grateful for Ashley, Christine, Natalie, and Jeff, and other members of the Eagle team who have shown some very good interest and support in bringing this information to you, and look forward to our continuing conversation. So let me see here. The key objectives I want to bring up to you today are really to provide you information about the current situation that we find ourselves in regarding the built environment, and then offer a new perspective that would suggest a different set of actions that you as Catalyst community leaders might take in addressing the challenges of our built environment. Some of the materials I'm going to share with you are representative of several years of effort on the part of our research team and partners that we've collaborated with over the years. So just as a beginning point, this slide kind of puts some perspective on it. It's currently estimated there are 15 million vacant structures in the United States. Some of those are just empty, others are abandoned. Now, 40% of those reside in just 10% of the census tracts, according to a study at Duke in 2012. So why is this an important thing to know? Because this is a concentrated problem, and it is predominantly in the greater Midwest. On the coast, there are different ways that land and buildings get used and reused. They tend not to sit empty as long and as they do here in the industrial Midwest, where we've seen significant population decline and manufacturing disinvestment. So I wanted to share this particular study with you that our colleagues in Detroit conducted in '96, the Blight Removal Task Force. These numbers have obviously changed because our friends in Detroit have been very active at removing blighted and abandoned structures. But I wanted to recognize the effort that they made, that I would encourage every one of your Catalyst communities to make, which is they did a parcel by parcel assessment of the structures in their community. So they had a good idea of what they were likely to be challenged to face. And while these numbers have changed, I'll mention that they looked at single-family residential properties, they looked at multifamily properties, they looked at neighborhood commercial properties, they looked at large-scale commercial properties, they looked at industrial properties, and they also looked at institutional properties like schools and other institutions in the community. And just to get a number of what the number of structures that were currently blighted or abandoned were and where they were located. And again, I encourage all of you to follow a similar pattern and just getting a sense of what is out there in your communities. Residential, commercial, industrial abandonment is not just an urban issue. It exists both in urban and rural areas. And I'm sure all of you can imagine an abandoned structure that you've just seen even yet today. So vacant structures are conducive to bad things. They're bad for public health and social welfare. They tend to attract rodents. They can be contaminators. If demolished, they might create dust plumes that have dangerous elements in them. They're also expensive to remove. And so they're a health and safety hazard. I'm going to spend a little bit of time trying to convince you of this so that you recognize the value of removing these structures. They devalue adjacent properties. If you have an abandoned structure next to a occupied structure, that abandoned structure will devalue the value of that adjacent property. It complicates loan and financial issues related to reuse of property. It reduces mobility within the community. Foreclosures often, end up in the hands of the local government, some of which I know you're probably all very familiar with. Eventually, during the process of abandonment, structures generally end up in the ownership portfolio of local governments. Okay. These can be very dangerous. They have multiple impacts. They have environmental impacts, including just the amount of waste that they generate, estimated by EPA, 136 million tons generated each year in construction and demolition, both new construction and demolition of abandoned and unused structures. It's about a quarter of the landfill waste that enters our landfills. So it's a pretty substantial waste stream. It's estimated that there are over 450,000 brownfields in the United States. And every day there are new ones. The next abandoned gas station comes online. And even though our colleagues at Eagle work diligently with their community partners to try to remove those structures, it's an endless process of new brownfields all going online as well as old ones being taken offline. And then, of course, we have Superfund sites. And for those of you who may not be familiar with that terminology, Superfund sites are the most dangerous and sites that have on-site contamination that can be hazardous to human health. And so they, again, present a clear health and safety hazard to our communities. They have economic impacts. The abandonment of structures has economic impacts. In 2020, the removal of all structures estimated would cost us $88 billion at an average rate of demolition. This is just demolition. So $88 billion to remove the currently abandoned structures. It decreases the tax revenues to public entities. This is one of the odd characteristics of structural abandonment. It tends to happen in our most distressed areas, the communities that have the least resources to deal with this challenge are often burdened with the most of this challenge. And local governments feel the financial stress of providing for the removal of these structures. One of the challenges is that because most of our infrastructure, our water and our sewer infrastructure, our road infrastructure is what we call a grid system, primarily run through gravity. So if you have a block with 10 empty buildings on it, but you have a block next to it with 10 occupied buildings, you have to maintain the sewer and water through those two blocks, even if one of the blocks has no occupancy and generates no revenues for that local government, because again, these systems are primarily gravity fed and interconnected. And so we can't just abandon blocks that don't have people on them because we need that infrastructure to support the blocks that do have people on them. So who pays for all this? It's us. And this is one of the more interesting characteristics of structural abandonment in general, when there's no responsible party, no legally responsible entity for the property, it ends up on the taxpayer's roll. The local governments end up having to clear out the materials if they have the capacity and clean up the mess. And for example, in brownfield development, you might hear economic developers say, oh, we're going to pay for it with tax revenues that we forego in the future. And essentially what they're saying is we're going to subsidize the removal of that brownfield and take those revenues that we might have collected in the future that might have gone to support police, fire, schools, other infrastructure needs, and we'll spend it on the cleanup of this site. So don't get too excited about tax abatements that are given to redevelop brownfields, because essentially you're mortgaging the future of that land for future revenue streams. And then, of course, we have these toxic sites that, oh my God, are so much more expensive and so much more dangerous for us to deal with and cause incredible burdens on local, state, and federal coffers to clean up these sites. So just to summarize, here's essentially where we are now in our current built environment paradigm. A private owner constructs the property, builds a house, builds a commercial site, builds an industrial site, creates an institutional infrastructure. Over a period of time, it's used, it may be reused, it may be renovated, but over an extended period of time, it will eventually be left abandoned. And, we've done some work on this. The average life of a commercial property is about 30 years. The average life of a residential property obviously varies from property to property, is approximately 90 years. Industrial properties, because they're so uniquely designed for their specific uses, we haven't really gotten a good average on that day. So the property eventually goes into the abandoned state. There is no owner of responsibility. It could have been owned by a family where there's a deceased member of the family. It could be owned by a company that went out of business. And now the burden of that property becomes a community burden. And as I just mentioned, that sets in motion a community decline. Abandonment breeds abandonment. Abandonment breeds negative indicators in social, economic, and health. So the government is left with the paying of the removal of those structures if it has the resources to do it. And we've seen over the years how often that it's necessary for local, state, and the federal government to help subsidize the removal of these structures. And so ultimately, the taxpayer pays the burden for the removal of these abandoned structures over the life of that structure. So one of the things I like to point out to people in this paradigm is you may be driving a Ford your entire life. You have never driven anything but Fords. But at the end of the useful life of the General Motors plant, you're paying for that removal of that structure. Again, the general taxpayer bears the burden of the removal of those structures, even though you may have never benefited from that structure. So, again, to summarize, it's a clear and health and safety hazard. It's expensive, and we're paying for it. So this is our issue. So the question that we began to ask ourselves is, so why do we do this? Why do we allow this type of built environment paradigm to exist? And it's a question of taking what is obvious before us and asking, why are we allowing this to occur? And is there another way that we might think about our built environment such that we don't inflict this kind of impact on ourselves? So this is what led us to the domicological paradigm that I'm going to share with you this morning. So if we decided that the current built environment paradigm was not acceptable, that it had negative things happening to us and really wasn't the way to go forward, what might we do differently? And so here are some of the things that we've currently identified that help us shape a new built environment paradigm. First, the first lesson is we would recognize that structures have a life cycle. They're built, used, reused, and eventually at some point in the future, varying on the particular structure, they go out of use. And so they have a life cycle. They have an end of life. So we should recognize that as the first element of building a new paradigm. And recognize that we would begin to think about how we would plan, design, construct, use, reuse, and deconstruct the built environment with this life cycle in mind. So we think about it differently, we design it differently, we construct it differently, we use it differently, we reuse it, and we eventually think about the deconstruction. We would think about public policies to provide the financial resources for local communities that at the end of the useful life of the structure, there would be resources to pay for the removal of the structure. And the burden wouldn't fall on the general taxpayer. So we'd have to imagine a new way of generating the revenues necessary to remove the structure at the end of its useful life. We would also support product development. Think about structural materials that have reuse and salvage value. Metals have reuse and salvage values. Those of you who have dealt with abandoned properties know that as soon as the lights go off and the boards go up on the window, the scrappers are in grabbing the metal. There's a reason for that. There's value in those materials. So we need to think about other value in the other materials that we use in our built environment and how we might value those materials such that it would incentivize the salvage and reuse of those materials. We would support businesses that collect and sell that salvaged material so that we encourage that full supply chain that collects the materials and then sells and resells the materials. And we would encourage consumers, this would be new buildings and renovations that people might be undertaking, to utilize that salvage material so that we have again, a supply chain that supports itself. So these are some of the built environment questions that we would need to answer if we said to ourselves, our current built environment is unsustainable, our current built environment paradigm is unsustainable, and we need to think of another way to envision how we build our built environment. So that brings us to the science of domicology. So, welcome to the science of domicology. You've now been indoctrinated into this terminology. And we're trying to advance this terminology as a way of bringing rigor and discipline to this concept because there's a lot of questions that are raised by this new built environment paradigm. Domicology is essentially the study of the social, economic, and environmental impacts associated with the life cycle of structures. So again, if we adopt a life cycle paradigm, what are we going to need to teach ourselves and discover amongst ourselves? It's obviously interdisciplinary. It deals with our material sciences and as well as our social sciences. It has an economic development impact in terms of job creation. It can impact carbon emissions, and it can impact the valuable natural resources that we're currently extracting. In the visual you see on the right of the slide, you'll see the lower part of the paradigm is the current linear model. We extract raw resources, we process those, we build our structure, we demolish the structure at its end of useful life, and most of that material ends up in the landfill. The concepts of domicology at the point of the end of the useful life of the structure is to intercept that landfill paradigm and salvage and reuse, recycle, repurpose, reprocess as much of that material as possible, bring it back into the built environment paradigm if that's where it is best used. But again, to interrupt that cycle such that it's not that linear model that we're currently operating under. Here's another version of that, easier to see. Again, looking at that point of construction, deconstruction, demolition, the diverting of materials through deconstruction, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Some of that material gets recycled, some of it gets reused. One of the things that we talk about in domicology is that much of the buildings that we have now have what we call the old growth forest wood in it. This is a very different wood than is what is being used in construction nowadays. This is the old growth wood that was timbered in Michigan over the last 100 years. Very dense, much different use than the current wood that is grown in a much faster pace, less dense. Also, we've got valuable other materials in these structures, doors, windows, mantles, oak floors. Again, some of this stuff can just be reused as it is if we take it out. Some of it requires some reprocessing. Think of the PVC that's in structures, think of the asphalt shingles, think of the cement in the basements. That material may need to be reprocessed so that it can be reused in other ways and then brought back into our built environment or other material reuses. So again, our challenge is to invent that supply chain circular economy. So just to spend a few minutes on deconstruction, this is one of the first parts of changing our built environment paradigm is to the extent feasible, we stop demolishing and we look to deconstructing. And this changes with each structure. Some structures, and I'll mention this here, we'll look at a full deconstruction. There's enough material that has value that we will want to pull it apart, nail by nail, brick by brick, as opposed to just skimming what might be the more valuable material like the oak floor. The metals, of course, will come out, and some of the more valuable material that can just be pulled out in what is called a skimming. and each material presents a different opportunity. So, deconstruction is a job creator and is a business generator within the local economy. So on the right, you'll see the concept of a full demolition takes about a day. Just knock it down, put it in a dumpster and haul it off to the landfill. Domicology encourages at least working through three skims. The first skim, you go in, you look at this valuable stuff. Hey, let's pull this oak floor out. Let's pull that unique mantle out. Let's pull out those unique appliances or lighting that's unique, or the windows. A 3-day skim is a longer term effort to bring down materials. It takes a little more time. You're looking at maybe some of the appliances and some of the other elements. And then a full deconstruction, which takes 5 to 10 days, obviously longer than demolition, and therefore more expensive, is, you're going to extract every usable bit of material in there. Now, there are cost differences, obviously, time and cost, right? And everybody in construction knows that time and cost are very important issues to consider. However, some of the mitigating factors in deconstruction is the value of the salvaged material. Plus, there's a job creation element to this and the preservation of the natural resources that are used in those structures. So looking at that impact of employing deconstruction as the dominant paradigm, right now our dominant paradigm is demolition. If we were to substitute deconstruction as the dominant paradigm, we see, there's the number of jobs that would be created in that deconstruction, very similar to construction in the type of labor. It's a good entry-level position for young people or people who may want to enter the workforce. There are warehousing jobs created for where the materials would go to. There are retail jobs created on the resale of the values. There are jobs created in the processing of that material. And then again, there's some value to be saved in the resale of the material. Resale valued materials are generally cheaper than new materials. So for some homeowners that might be doing some renovation, they can save some money through the salvage resale market. Demolition, less of an economic impact. You've got a couple of folks operating a few machines. They crush it, push it into the landfill, and that's the end of that opportunity. So we see that there are places across the United States that have taken this opportunity seriously, and we have examples of deconstruction training programs that have taken place here in Michigan, as well as other parts of the United States, where they're training folks on this material salvage and reuse strategy. And generally, folks are making about $18 an hour after graduating with this. And many of these jobs are very attainable. 74% of them only require something equivalent to a high school diploma. And so 15%, these would be the more equipment-oriented positions, might be, would require something along the lines of an associate degree. So again, these are positions that could be of value in addressing some of the challenges in our most distressed areas. So, agreeing that we would say deconstruction is a better application than demolition. Okay, so now we're to the next part of the supply chain. So now what do we do with the materials? This is one of the challenges that communities who have embraced deconstruction have faced. They will ask for a diversion of a certain amount of materials. And this is one of the things I'm going to make a point of at the end of the session. Local governments should adopt diversion ordinances. So you would say take 50% of the materials and divert it so that it doesn't go into the landfill. Now you need to think about, okay, where does that diverted material go? This is some of the challenge we face. We need to create a secondary market for the reuse of salvaged materials. If this were easy, it would already have been done. As I tell my students over and over again, all the easy problems have been solved. The ones that are left for us to solve in this century are the very difficult challenges, and dome ecology is one of them. So we need to create a secondary market and support the development of that market so that salvaged materials, when they are deconstructed, have a place to go and have a market opportunity to be resold, so that we're not just moving a pile of demolition from the landfill to some other warehouse, but actually a retail market that would be able to use that. And to do that, we need to do a few things to make sure that there is a retail market for salvage materials. One thing contractors worry about is the amount of materials that would be available to them for their jobs, for the projects that they're under construction with. So they need to have a regular supply of reliable materials that they can call upon. So again, we need to encourage that salvage process such that there is a supply of a nature that contractors can rely upon to do the work they may be doing as a result of either a renovation or even a new construction. Secondly, the issue of grading and security, and this is an area that many states are looking at. What are the issues related to reusing salvage materials? Most of the structures, particularly the older structures, may have lead paint or some other contamination, asbestos in them. We need to be cautious about that in taking these structures apart, that we don't put workers' health at risk, but also in the resale of the materials, that we're not reselling materials that have potential for contamination. Now, it's addressed in a number of different ways, but the grading of the materials is one way of ensuring that in the new construction that might use salvage material, or a renovation that may use salvage material, that the material they're getting is of a quality that they can rely on and meets our code requirements. And so we need to develop our grading and coding requirements such that we facilitate the reuse of this. We need to educate ourselves, you are as contractors, as local government officials, that we want to use salvage materials. Some communities have adopted incentives to encourage the reuse of salvage materials in new construction. As catalyst communities, if you're in the process of building a public facility, think about utilizing possibly salvage materials as a part of that construction to, again, create that supply chain for the demand. And we need to advance additional policies that support this so that we can have a reliable supply chain for the gathering and the resale of these materials and the reuse of those materials. And again, if this were easy, it would have already been done. It's not easy, but it's our challenge. So some of you may be concerned about achieving certain levels of carbon reduction. And again, the materials entering landfills tend to contribute, as in particular wood, as it decomposes, releases carbon into the atmosphere. Reutilizing that carbon keeps that captured carbon, not only the amount of carbon in the tree, but also in the transporting of the materials, the not cutting down the new trees, the lungs of our planet. There's a lot of carbon savings that can be identified in salvaged material reuse. And this particular slide talks about some of the estimated metric tons of carbon dioxide that are perhaps generated through framing lumber, standard brick, asphalt shingles, flooring, concrete, drywall, siding, and a total amount per structure. And you can see concrete is one of the bigger saving areas here. If we can reprocess and reuse concrete in other uses, we can go a long ways to reducing our carbon footprint. Unused wood materials is about 13 times the energy required more than reused flooring. So there's some interesting evidence out there that suggests that material salvage and reuse is a good way to help improve our carbon impacts. So I want to spend a few minutes talking about paying for this, right? I raised the issue earlier about the challenges of who pays for the removal of abandoned structures? We all do. Is there another way of envisioning that might reduce the burden of costs that local governments pay for the removal of abandoned structures? And so we've talked about some reactive methods and proactive methods. Some of these are things like requiring, at a minimum, before a property is demolished, you do an inspection of the property just to get an estimate. Is there anything of value in this structure that may have a resale value? All right. So at a minimum, the local government ought to think about doing an assessment before properties are demolished. Most of the land banks are quite capable of doing this, by the way. So if you have a land bank operating in your community, asking them to do this. If they're not, they're probably already doing it because they see value in these materials. Think about a minimum diversion and think about requiring deconstruction. And on the other end, some of the proactive methods, extended producer responsibility. Here's the concept. If you make it, you're responsible for its end of life. And we have examples of that in Michigan. Think of the bottle bill. And I know there's an effort by many of the environmental organizations in our state to extend our extended producer responsibility to other products and materials. Think about electronics. If you make it, you have a responsibility for its end of life. Either you take it back as the producer or you pay somebody else to take it back. And then think about ways of embedding the concepts of dome ecology in new construction. And some of the things that we've explored here, and these are some more of the avant-garde, forward thinking, the kind of scholarship you would expect from colleagues at higher education to really help you think about additional ways to finance this work. And so think about what we call deconstruction bonds and insurance. So on the bonding side, some of you are probably already doing this. When you put up a cell tower, most of you probably require the cell tower company to purchase a bond with the local government to ensure at the end of the useful life of the cell tower, there are resources to pay for the removal of that cell tower. That's just smart public policy. You don't want an abandoned cell tower falling over and killing people or damaging property. So we put these kinds of bonds on these kinds of structures. We do the same thing with the large electric generating windmills. You build it like that, you're going to take it off. In Public Act 233, some of you may be familiar with the act that was passed this last December in terms of the siting of large renewable energy arrays. The state of Michigan had the wisdom to include a bonding requirement. So if they put in a large solar panel array in your community or a large windmill generating, electric generating windmill, they are required to post a bond with the local government. And every 5 years, they're required to revisit that bond to make sure that it's adequately financed for the removal of those structures at their end of useful life. Good thinking. Let's do it with other structures. The opportunity to put bonds on all new construction so that at the end of the useful life, there are the resources to remove that. Now, one of the challenges with bonding is it's an upfront expense. So if you think about a structure having a 30 to 50-year life, the upfront expense at the beginning could be substantial with a bond. So is there a way to spread that cost of deconstruction at the end of useful life over a period of the use of the product or the use of the structure? And so that's where we get to this idea of an insurance policy or something like an insurance policy, a deconstruction policy. But let me encourage you, local government leaders, Catalyst community leaders, look at your bonding practices now and think about ways that you might embed the deconstruction concept. Some folks have used economic development incentives. If you're awarding a tax abatement to a new development, you might include in that proposal an expectation that at the end of the useful life of that structure, they would either remove the structure or donate a certain portion of the funds to the community to remove the structure. And that's been done in other parts of the United States, particularly with economic development incentives. PA 233 has an interesting clause. They call it a host community agreement, where if they build one of these large solar arrays in your jurisdiction, the energy company would negotiate with the host community a financial payment to the community up to 2,000 per megawatt of electric generation capacity for that, and those are all negotiable. But again, the idea is that when something is built, you're thinking about its end of useful life, and you're securing some resource or some benefit for the community to remove that structure at the end of its useful life. Now, on the insurance concept, the idea here, of course, is that structures would have an insurance policy. You can think of it as like a fire insurance or other homeowner insurance. There are examples of this in our society where we've required individuals to carry insurance. Generally, mortgage insurance companies require these things as a result of gaining finance. You will have an insurance on the property. But think about a deconstruction insurance policy that seeks to hold those who build the structure or use the structure, because many structures go through multiple uses over their useful life, paying a premium in that structure so that at the end of the life of that structure, there is someone, an insurance party in this particular case, who is responsible for the removal of the structure. One of the things that we observe in this potential policy paradigm is that you got a third-party insurance company monitoring the use of the property. So if you happen to have a spill, a contamination event of some kind that would increase the cost of cleaning up that site, the insurance company is going to increase your premium, so that we have an ongoing process of monitoring these sites so that when there might be an accident or an intentional consequence of some problem, the insurance company says, okay, your premium just went up. Just like with poor drivers and auto insurance. You have a lot of accidents, your insurance premium goes up. With a deconstruction insurance policy, again, you have a third party, a private company, another set of jobs here for assessors who are making these assessments, who estimate this. Now, and we've done some arithmetic. This is basic math. We love throwing formulas at folks, but we've done some basic math. If you look at the cost of deconstruction, an average cost per square foot, the square footage of the structure, the length of occupancy, and the value of the salvage materials. Now, remember, the idea here is that we want to salvage materials. If you subtract that from your overall cost, you can estimate over a period of time, and obviously there's a lot of variability here depending on the nature of the structure and the materials used. So for a residential structure, it might add an additional $60, approximately, not including the value of the salvage materials. Now think about this. If you build something and you know at the end of its useful life, you're responsible for the removal of the structure, because that's the built environment paradigm we're moving to, you would build it in such a way that you would maximize the value of the materials. Or as in the domicological world, we design for deconstruction. So we use techniques in construction that allows us to remove materials in a thoughtful and usable way. So it's as basic as using screws versus nails. Easier to, don't use glue, use other methods to join things. It's harder to pull materials apart when they're nailed together. If they're screwed together, easier to pull them apart. And the material is much more valuable because it has been destroyed in that deconstruction process. So again, if you think about this, if you know ahead of time You're going to be responsible for the structure at its end of useful life. You will design for deconstruction. You'll use materials that have good resale value, and you'll build it in such a way that you can salvage those materials at their end of useful life, thus maximizing the value of those materials and reducing your deconstruction insurance costs. So again, we're changing that whole built environment paradigm, right? And similarly, we did one with commercial properties, obviously a lot of variability, number of years of occupancy, size of the structure. This would maybe increase commercial property insurance to $360. Now, I can imagine there are businesses and entrepreneurs out there who see this and say, you just increased my cost of doing business. I hear that. Here's the other way of saying the same thing. You just removed the burden of removing that structure from the taxpayer. And if you're a business person in that community, you're paying taxes for the removal of those structures. So we're shifting the cost of the removal of structures over to the users of the structure. And if you remember my example earlier on, you drove Fords your whole life, you're no longer paying for the removal of the Tesla auto plant. So again, it's a more equitable way to distribute the costs of removing structures at their end of useful life by shifting the burden of that cost over to the users of that structure or the consumers of the products that are made in that structure or the services that are provided in that structure. So there's a fairness element to this. Okay, we're moving up on the end here. So those are some of the basic concepts we wanted to share with you as colleagues in our built environment. I want to say that behind us, oh, I see a typo here, shame on me. There's quite a few in-depth articles and research materials on this stuff in our domicology webpage. There are, again, our challenges that are before us are pretty substantial in creating a Midwest market for salvage materials and encouraging others. One thing that we've looked at in our work is to ways that local governments can affect this. Inspect before you tear it down, think about using reusable markets. There's toolkits out there. Let's see here. And one of the things that we're anxious to do as a university is partner with you in this process. Can we build a circular economy around the built environment and all materials in that fact? Some of that is going to require some of the work of my colleagues in laboratories here at MSU and other institutions of higher education who need to invent the materials that meet our needs but can be reused and repurposed. We don't create materials that have no reusable value, right? And or might be toxic. So we have to create materials that are reusable and work with you as community leaders and business professionals to apply those materials and also reap the benefits from creating this circular economy. So one of the things we've been working on is Senate Bill 201, which calls for an allocation of funding to create a circular economy research institute at Michigan State to work with others to create an advanced circular economy. So look at your local government officials and some of your state reps and talk about it. So here is where we are. All right. So our current environment is not sustainable. It's not debatable. It's not like you can deny there are abandoned structures out there. And we know who causes it. It's us. And so we're the responsible parties and we do it to ourselves. My goodness, if you knew you were behaving in such a way, you would stop behaving in such a way. And so the challenge is before us, if not now, when, if not us, who? Why won't we act on this? We have tools, we have models, we have policies, and we have practices that can help us move away from the wasteful paradigm of the linear built environment. Now, the challenge is and these are the things, as we think about it, do we lack the will to do it? Do we lack the vision to do it? Do we lack the desire to do it? Do we lack the leadership to do it? Or do we lack all of these things? And as leaders in Catalyst communities can speak to this topic. So the challenge, of course, is to think about what do we say to our progeny when we knew what this linear built environment caused and we did not act on their behalf. What will we say to them? How will we explain how we behaved at this time and in this place with what we know and what you now know an informed domocologist? So with that, I will leave you with these materials and turn it back to our host and see if there's some questions they would like us to respond to.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Rex, for that wonderful and very informative presentation. I will turn it over to Jeff to ask some of the questions. I know he's been asking some of them or answering some of them in the Q&A box. Again, to submit your question, there's a Q&A box down at the bottom, and you can go ahead and type your question in. We've got about 9 minutes to go ahead and get some questions answered. So thank you, everyone.
All right. So once again, thanks, Rex. That was great. I mean, I've heard it before, but it always it acts as a catalyst, right? So that's why we're here today. We have a few questions. So I think some of these you've touched on a little bit, but maybe some additional thoughts. So we'll just get started. Even though you can recoup some costs from selling salvaged materials, what are the typical comparison costs of deconstruction versus demolition?
I have a slide on that. And
Hmm.
if you, depending on where you are in the United States, again, this is a very regional issue. It could be a money gainer for you. For example, I'll give the example. If you're deconstructing a redwood structure, a home in California made with redwood, the value of the redwood is such a great value. You're going to make money on the resale of that redwood that pays for the removal of the materials and the removal of the other elements of the structure. So it varies from structure to structure. At some estimates, it could be a break-even proposition. I don't think we're going to see a whole lot in the near future where you're going to make a whole lot of money doing this unless there's some uniquely rare materials in the structure you're taking down. But it's definitely close to 60 to 70% of the cost reduction through salvage material and resale. But that should improve if we improve our design for deconstruction and we improve our secondary market.
All right, great, thanks. So Emily asks, beyond the Habitat for Humanity restores, are there a few resale shops, or are there few resale shops from building waste removal services? How do we make them more widely available and be sure they have more of what's needed? So, how do we expand upon that Habitat for Humanity restore um, type of scenario?
Yep, good question. Very good question. This is a challenge, right? And this is some of the balancing act in creating a supply chain. We want to generate the salvaged materials, but we also need the retail store to manage the collection of that material and the resale of it. So there aren't very many in Michigan. This is a very marginal area of investment right now. Architectural salvage is probably our oldest and best known facility in Detroit. And I would encourage folks to go down and visit the architectural salvage facility in Detroit just to think about what could be there. They actually have two facilities, one where they store primarily the large lumber, and then other facility where they store the appliances and, you know, bathtubs with feet, all the other things that come out of these older structures. I would encourage you to visit that, take a look at what is being collected in that particular region. Now, this is going to need to be a regional thing. And when I say region, I mean multi-county region, because the movement of materials is expensive, right? Both in terms of its carbon impact, but just the cost of removing. So we'd have to create a regional hub. around multi-county areas, and then over a period of time, make sure they have enough material. So not every community is going to have a salvage and reuse facility. There may be an antique store that has old doorknobs and things like that that are really cool that you can look at. But we need to actually move towards that. And this is where we need to bring our economic development professionals along, help them incentivize these kinds of stores so that these entrepreneurs who are willing to move down this path with us have the capacity to be successful in their work. Let me share a study we did a few years ago. You'll love this one, Jeff. I think I've probably mentioned it to you. We did a study on the port in Muskegon. The idea that we would collect the salvage material from all the Great Lakes cities. And the numbers are incredible. You think of the Clevelands, the Detroits, the Milwaukees, the Toledos, all the Great Lakes cities, Chicago. If we were efficient in collecting that material and then shipping it to a central location where sorting and reprocessing could occur, you could build a deconstruction economy around that. And what we found in the process, what would work best is at the site of demolition, you pull a structure apart, you throw it in a container, just like a truck container. You put that container on a ship, you move it to Muskegon, you take it out, you sort it, you grab whatever useful, and find ways to use whatever you can. And but the problem is in the Great Lakes, our shipping industry is what they call a bulk hold industry. We really don't have a container shipping sector. And so those bulk hold companies are hesitant to put lead painted materials, asbestos materials in those bulk holds. You could line them, but that's an added expense. So until we get a container shipping industry on the Great Lakes, which we really don't have, we're not likely to be able to move to this paradigm. But anyway, there's a lot of potential there.
All right. Let's see here. So, specific to Michigan, any policies or success stories that you can share for any folks here in Michigan? Are there any municipalities that have undertaken these policies or
Well,
currently?
there's quite a bit of conversation going on, and I know there is some effort here in Lansing to try to get a diversion ordinance in place, that a certain percent of the materials would be diverted from a demolition site. There are certainly um, some communities that are considering it. So that's one end of it. And then again, there are some places that have architectural salvage facilities. I know there's one in Kalamazoo that also operates. They don't tend to manage lumber, but they tend to manage some of the artifacts and things that are in structures. So we're still working on some good successes. There is examples of communities that are now beginning to think about requiring, as a part of new construction, a deconstruction clause, and that would again address some of the challenges that we're looking at here. So you could be the first. Those Catalyst community leaders out there, you could be the first.
Yep. Yeah, we're just waiting for the first one, right? Once the first one jumps in, then everyone follows. So we need that champion out there to get this cause started.
Be a leader,
Um,
take a risk.
Brian's curious, are you going to be speaking at the National Brownfield Conference by any chance
I have
in
not
Chicago?
been, I have not scheduled that. I have not been invited, nor have I put it on my calendar. So, but thanks for the invite, or thanks for the suggestion. I'll say that.
Yeah, yeah. All right. There's a few more questions on there. We'll try to get to those afterwards, but it is noon and being mindful of everyone's time, we're going to wrap up. But personally, Rex, once again, thanks very much. That was great as always. And I will turn it over to Natalie to wrap up.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Jeff, for managing those questions, and to Dr. Rex LaMore for the presentation. Thank you to our attendees for joining us and asking great questions. Like Jeff mentioned, there were still some questions in the Q&A box we didn't get a chance to get to, but as a reminder, this webinar was recorded and registered attendees will be receiving a follow-up email Thank you so much for joining us and have a great afternoon.